Hang on a minute, let's put it a different way. If the Prime Minister has lied to the Commons, do you agree that's a resignation event?
Yes.
Therefore, I'm asking you, Laura Trott, and you've been tweeting about this today. You've tweeted the following. At least Lucy Powell has the courage to call for a change of culture in Number 10 after the PM was in an absurd position this week defending the best pal of a paedophile.
Well, 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 don't you all look lovely today? This is how your capital city should look on a daily basis. There is only one man that could have made this happen today, and that man is Tommy Robinson. And let me tell you, you know, you've been called many things. You've been pushed to the back of the line. You've been given labels. You've been smeared by the mainstream media, by the BBC, by all the people who put you down. But you are none of those things, because you are great people indeed. And they have tried to silence us. They took my friend Tommy and they put him in prison. They took my friend Charlie and they shot him. They tried to take my children and they deported my ass from Australia. And I say fuck the Australians for that. But it doesn't matter. They can put us in prison. They can shoot us. They can lock us up, but they will not stop us now. Because we are not here because we hate. We are not here because we want bad things for other people. We are here because we grew up knowing freedoms, and we will get those freedoms back for our kids and our grandchildren. Yes, we will. And I will say three things. I speak for no one but myself. And I remain the biggest bitch in Britain. But let me say, I don't care what religion you are. Just don't try and take your religion and shove it down the faces of my children or my people. I don't care what biological sex you may think you might be. You can identify as a light if you want to. I will take a light bulb and I will shove it up your ass if it makes you happy. I don't care. But do not ask me to believe the same shit that you believe. There are only two biological sexes, and that's all there will ever be. And when it comes to race and colour, we all got along very well for a good 20, 30 years till they started to divide us. We don't care what colour you are. We don't care where you come from. But if you want to come to this fine country, you better come here. You better work hard. You better fit in. You better love our flag, because if you don't want to fit in, then you can fuck off. My darlings, remember this feeling. Remember this day. Remember what Tommy Robinson has achieved against all the odds, because each one of you showed up, and I bloody love you all for it. You are told that you are alone. You are told that you don't matter. Take it from me and you can take it to the bank. You are not alone. We are many and we are stronger together. Thank you for listening to me, London. Thank you.
No. The ground shook as thousands gathered, but nothing prepared the nation for what came next.
Katie Hopkins stepped onto the stage, and in an instant, the silence turned into thunder. This wasn't just another speech. It was a warning, a rallying cry, and a challenge to everything the establishment wants people to believe. For 5 relentless minutes, she unleashed words so sharp they cut through the lies that have smothered Britain for years. Every line landed like a hammer, every truth shone like a flare in the darkness. And the crowd, ordinary British men and women, rose with one voice, roaring their approval. What you are about to hear is not politics as usual. It is a moment of raw defiance, and it has left the entire nation talking. At the Unite the Kingdom March, something extraordinary unfolded, something that cannot be dismissed by the media or buried under political spin. Katie Hopkins, often attacked, mocked, and silenced, stood firm before the people and delivered a speech that many are already calling historic. She did not hesitate. She did not soften her words. Instead, she looked directly at the heart of the crisis facing Britain and spoke truths others are too afraid to say. The crowd didn't just listen, they erupted, cheering her on with a passion that echoed across the city. For years, many have felt ignored, voiceless, and betrayed. Yet in that moment, they felt represented. They felt heard. Katie Hopkins did not mince her words when she described the slow collapse of British values. She spoke about a country where free speech is under attack, where patriotism is mocked, and where ordinary citizens feel punished for loving their own flag. These are not comfortable topics for the establishment. These are not ideas welcomed by the elites in Westminster or the media class in London. But Katie dared to drag them into the light. Her message was clear. Britain is at a crossroads, and if the people do not stand now, there may be no turning back. The audience clung to her every word, nodding, clapping, and shouting in agreement as she reminded them that silence is a weapon of control, and courage is the only way forward. The energy was unlike anything seen in years. Flags waved higher, voices grew louder, and chants shook the air. This was not just a crowd, it was a movement. They weren't there for empty promises or polished speeches written by consultants. They came for truth. And Katie Hopkins gave it to them with fire in her voice and conviction in her heart. She spoke of the dangers of a divided nation, of communities torn apart by political correctness and double standards, of families struggling under policies that seemed built to weaken rather than strengthen them. She reminded everyone that those in power fear a united people more than anything else, because once the people rise, the establishment begins to fall. That's why the moment felt different. That's why the reaction was so explosive. The people weren't just reacting to a speech, they were reacting to years of frustration finally being given a voice. For too long, truth has been buried under layers of censorship, fact-checkers, and media gatekeepers. But on this day, at this march, Katie Hopkins ripped that mask away. She said what others only whisper in private. She shouted what millions think but dare not say in public. And as she did, the crowd roared in defiance of the silence that has been forced upon them. It was more than politics. It was more than one speech. It was a release, a surge of energy, and a moment of clarity. Every cheer, every clap, every chant was a signal that the people are no longer willing to sit quietly while their nation slips away. The Unite the Kingdom March. Once dismissed by critics as a fringe gathering, the Unite the Kingdom March became a headline moment that even those who despised Katie Hopkins could not ignore. For 5 powerful minutes, the world watched as a crowd came alive, and in their chants and cheers, Britain's heartbeat was heard again. The establishment wanted people to believe Katie Hopkins was just one voice, a controversial figure whose words should be brushed aside or forgotten. But the reaction that day proved something much bigger was happening. This was not about one woman speaking her mind. It was about a nation finally confronting the truths it had been told to ignore. Every sentence she delivered carried weight, striking at the very issues long buried by those in power. She spoke of broken promises, the betrayal of ordinary citizens, and a system that enriches the few while leaving the many behind. These weren't distant ideas. They were the real struggles of countless people standing in that crowd. For them, it felt like their daily frustrations had finally been put into words for the world to hear. What made her speech electrifying was not just the message but the way she delivered it. Katie Hopkins didn't stand there with rehearsed lines or carefully polished phrases designed to impress. She spoke as someone with nothing left to lose, someone pushed to the edge who chose to fight back with the only weapon she had, the truth. And the crowd answered, not with polite applause, but with thunderous roars that shook the very ground beneath their feet. Even the establishment media, usually quick to mock her, couldn't deny what was unfolding. Cameras captured the sea of flags, the chants, and the faces of people who looked more alive and determined than they had in years. She reminded the nation of Britain's history of resilience, of its tradition of standing tall against adversity. But she also warned that this resilience was being eroded by leaders more interested in pleasing global elites than protecting their own citizens. She painted a chilling picture of a nation at risk of losing its soul, where children are taught to be ashamed of their history, where men and women fear speaking their minds, and where the proud symbols of the nation are treated as offensive instead of celebrated. This was not a speech crafted for comfort. It was a wake-up call, a reminder that silence in times of crisis is nothing less than surrender. As her words rang out over the march, the atmosphere shifted. What began as a gathering turned into an uprising. People chanted not just in support of her, but in defiance of everything they felt had been taken from them. Flags rose higher, voices grew louder, and strangers embraced as if they were family bound by one cause, the defense of their country. The energy of that moment could not be contained. Even those watching from home through live streams and broadcasts admitted they felt something awaken deep inside them. It was the spark of unity, the realization that they were not alone in their frustrations or their determination to fight back. Katie Hopkins did not stop with broad strokes. She drilled down into specifics. She spoke about the erosion of free speech, pointing out how ordinary people are silenced while the powerful say what they like without consequence. He highlighted the hypocrisy of leaders who preach equality yet live lives completely disconnected from the reality of working families. She tore into the failures of policies that prioritize outsiders over citizens, leaving communities fractured and people abandoned. Each truth she delivered was like a hammer blow, and with every strike, the crowd's energy intensified. This was no longer just a march. It was a declaration that the people of Britain refused to be ignored, refused to be silenced, and refused to surrender their nation to forces that do not represent them. The suspense in the air was undeniable. Everyone knew that such words would spark outrage among the political elite, that the media would twist and spin her message, and that the establishment would do everything in its power to discredit what happened that day. Yet none of that mattered in the moment. The people did not care how the headlines would read tomorrow. They cared that for once the truth was spoken, publicly, unapologetically, and without fear. And in their cheers, they sent a message not just to Katie Hopkins, but to every politician, journalist, and leader watching. The days of silence are over. The people have found their voice, and they will not let it be taken away again. This section of her speech ended, not with a whimper, but with an eruption. The chants grew so loud they drowned out the city beyond the march. Ordinary citizens, mothers, fathers, veterans, students stood side by side, shouting in unison words of defiance and hope. It was a sound that cut through the fog of political deception and media manipulation, a sound that reminded everyone of the power that lies in unity. The establishment had tried for years to divide, to weaken, to silence. But at the Unite the Kingdom March, under the fire of Katie Hopkins' words, those tactics failed. What emerged instead was a vision of a people no longer willing to bow their heads, no longer willing to remain silent. And as the chants echoed into the night, it was clear that something had shifted in Britain, something that cannot be undone. As the roar of the crowd thundered on, it became clear that the Unite the Kingdom March was no longer just an event. It was a warning shot fired directly at those who believe they can control Britain's destiny from behind closed doors. The energy in the air was heavy with defiance, and Katie Hopkins' words still hung like smoke over the thousands who gathered. She had broken through the carefully constructed walls of censorship and fear, and the result was an eruption that no one in power could ignore. Every face in that crowd told the same story. People who had been pushed too far, silenced for too long, and now stood together as living proof that Britain's spirit cannot be crushed. The suspense surrounding what Katie Hopkins said was not just about her delivery, but about the danger it posed to the political order. When someone dares to speak truths the establishment spends years trying to bury, the reaction is not only explosive, it is unpredictable. The crowd knew it. The cameras knew it. Even those watching from the comfort of their homes could feel it. Something irreversible had just been setting into motion. Hopkins called out the very forces that have dictated the narrative for decades. Global elites, media, manipulators, and politicians who serve everyone but their own people. They stripped away their masks with brutal honesty, and the crowd responded like a dam finally bursting. She described a Britain in chains, not the chains of war or conquest, but the invisible chains of political correctness, endless regulations and cultural silencing. They warned that if these chains were not broken, Britain would wake up one day to find itself unrecognizable country, where identity, pride, and freedom had been erased. The people erupted because they recognized themselves in her words. They were not theories spoken from an ivory tower. They were realities lived on the streets, in the workplaces, and in the schools of everyday Britain. Her warnings carried weight because they reflected truths people had been told to deny. The eruption of cheers was not just for Hopkins. It was for the collective realization that they were not alone in their struggle. What made this moment so powerful was its unpredictability. No one in the establishment expected a crowd this large, this energized, and this united. They believed they had already divided Britain beyond repair. They believed they had already cowed its people into silence with fear of cancel culture and punishment. Yet here stood thousands, refusing to bow, daring to wave their flags proudly, daring to shout their truths. The suspense came from the question echoing in every corner of the march. If the people can rise here in this moment, what comes next? Could this be the spark that lights a fire across the entire nation? Could this be the moment that history later points to as the beginning of a great shift? Katie Hopkins pressed deeper, striking nerves that sent shock waves through the audience. She spoke of betrayal, not just by one party or one government, but by an entire system built on deception. She described politicians who smile for cameras but sell out their own people in backroom deals. She exposed the media that pretends to speak truth while acting as nothing more than a shield for the powerful. She even warned of cultural leaders who chip away at national pride, rewriting history, and erasing traditions. These were not vague accusations. They were sharp arrows, fired directly at those who thought they could continue ruling unchallenged. The more she spoke, the louder the chants grew until it felt as though the crowd itself was speaking back, demanding accountability with every roar. The Suspense was not only in what Hopkins revealed but in how long the establishment could continue to ignore. Could they write this off as a fringe event, or would they be forced to admit that something deeper was brewing in the heart of Britain? Already, whispers spread through the crowd of how the media would twist the story, how politicians would scramble to discredit not only Hopkins but every man and woman who dared to stand at that march. Yet the people were prepared. They knew the attacks were coming, but they no longer cared. The truth had already been spoken in the open, and once the truth is out, it cannot be buried again. For those standing in the cold air of the march, time seemed to stand still. They were living a moment that felt bigger than themselves, bigger than one speech, bigger than one person. It was as if the very soul of Britain had been reignited, its heartbeat pounding in unison with every cheer and chant. The suspense carried into every thought. What would happen tomorrow? Would this moment spread like wildfire, igniting communities across the nation? Or would the establishment tighten its grip, desperate to crush this defiance before it grows? These questions hung over the crowd like storm clouds, but no one there was afraid. Instead, they stood taller, sang louder, and waved their flags with a new sense of pride. By the time this section of her speech drew to a close, Katie Hopkins had transformed the rally into something more than anyone expected. The eruption of the crowd was not just noise. It was a signal, a declaration that Britain is not broken, not defeated, and not ready to give up. It was a suspenseful moment that hinted at something greater on the horizon, something that even the most powerful elites would struggle to contain. And as the chants continued to echo into the night, one thing became undeniable. The march had become a movement, and the truth spoken on that stage had sparked a fire that